Alright everyone, welcome back to another Commander video. Here today to talk to you about competitive EDH, which at this point might as well be its own format separate from the rest of Commander. If you are not familiar with competitive EDH, it is essentially the same exact game, and you can play competitive EDH decks alongside non-competitive ones. The game will just be incredibly unbalanced, so there's really nothing to keep you from doing that unless people in your playgroup are fed up with you. But competitive EDH is about fast win cons, reliable win cons, and high interaction. You need to be able to interact with just about every other action, whether it be a counter spell, a removal spell, or some kind of resource denial card, some kind of stacks card. Competitive EDH decks do this the best because, playing on a low mana curve, it means that as the game progresses, more can be done in a single turn. The counter spells tend to be on the cheaper side, so you will play things like Mental Misstep, Swan Song, or Dispel. This of course in addition to Force of Will and Pact of Negation. Having the cheapest possible answers for any kind of spell means that your opponents will also have similar cards in the competitive EDH arena. That is the beauty of this format. There's a misconception that when you play a competitive EDH game, you will only last a few turns. While this is sometimes true, it is because you have such cheap responses that if you are playing in a balanced game, there is very rarely something that will be done early in the game that won't have a response. So if you play a food chain earlier on, someone might be able to get rid of it with a Force of Vigor. Many people are distracted by the average turn a deck can win. It's a good measurement for power, but realistically, if you were to play in a competitive EDH game with 3 other players, is every game going to be ended turn 3 or 4? Probably not. It is also because of the control decks, it is because of the stacks decks, disruption in general, that most games will not only last 3 or 4 turns. But just know that the misconception of these decks winning as soon as possible only really increases the competitiveness of the game, not as much as the speed. So if every player has their own way of responding to a problem, the game then becomes who runs out of answers, who's able to pull off their win con uncontested first, and that tends to be longer than 3 or 4 turns. Another thing that you need to know about competitive EDH, the most well-rounded and most played of competitive EDH decks tend to be of a similar shell, as it is not so much the power of the commander as it is about the actual deck that you're playing. The commander only serves to enhance the strategy. There are of course exceptions to this, but when we talk about the most popular win cons in competitive EDH, we tend to see things like Ad Nauseam, we tend to see things like Demonic Consultation, Tainted Pact. These are ways that you can win pretty easily in combination with some kind of card like Thassa's Oracle or Laboratory Maniac, something that can win you the game if you draw a card when you have no cards in your library. Even if you don't have that kind of win con, these are still popular cards that you're going to see among the majority of competitive EDH decks. As with Ad Nauseam, I mentioned that the mana curve for competitive EDH is incredibly low, so losing life per mana cost of each card might seem like a scary thing at first until you realize most of your cards are 3 mana or less, so you'll end up with a third of your deck in your hand at the very least. Another very popular win con in competitive EDH is Protean Hulk. There are a lot of different combos that you can go and fetch out once Protean Hulk dies. Among the most popular is the Mikaeus the Unhallowed Walking Ballista combo with a sack outlet, of course. Here you are able to deal an infinite amount of damage. Another very popular win con is Food Chain. Food Chain is always going to be a go-to choice for competitive, simply because it will take advantage of a commander that will offer you a benefit each time it's cast, either by a cast trigger itself or an ETB. This is what made commanders like Prosh, General Tazri, Niv Mizzet Reborn, and the First Sliver really powerful. These all have some kind of benefit of being replayed, and the way that you achieve infinite mana in order to accomplish this is by using some kind of creature like a Squee that you're able to recast as many times as you want from exile after you exile it to Food Chain and get excess mana. You then float a ton of mana that you can only use for creatures. You then use that mana for any of those commanders, and there are several more. In all likeliness, we will continue to receive commander options that offer you some kind of benefit when they are cast, when they enter the battlefield, making Food Chain a very powerful long-term strategy. There are also control decks that can win by pretty much any win con, since the win con does not really define the deck, but rather the control aspect. There you will see a ton of counterspells, you will see a ton of removal, you will even see some resource denial. But just know that there are decks that are created in competitive EDH for the sole purpose of slowing down the game, slowing down your win con, forcing you to resort to other cards. And then of course we have stacks. Stacks is by far the one reason why I say competitive EDH is not necessarily a speed format. There are several different cards that are very cheap that prevent your opponents from going off in a single turn. We have Dranith Magistrate, which is a newer one. Your opponents can't cast spells from anywhere other than their hands, which already shuts down the food chain combo. But it also just shuts down commanders because you're not able to cast your commander from the command zone. And with aid from one of the newer sets in Commander Legends, we received two pretty good creatures with Flash, Hull Breacher and Opposition Agent, both of which act as a bit of resource denial, denying opponents of excess card draw and tutoring. People have resorted to stacks out of necessity since most of the win cons uncontested are able to win within 4 turns. And as I mentioned earlier, competitive EDH is not so much about the commanders themselves, but rather the win cons that can take advantage of those commanders. Some exceptions to this would be commanders that are just unique, such as Elsha of the Infinite and Najila the Blade Blossom. Both commanders have their own win con that you are not going to see in most other competitive EDH decks, but they are quite competitive in their own way. And before I end the video, I should remind you that you can make a competitive EDH deck with just about any commander. The power level will vary depending on your ability to interact with other players. So logically, if you play more colors, you have access to different kinds of spells. So if you are not playing blue, then you're not able to counterspell as easily. If you're not playing black, you don't have access to the best tutors. And if you're not playing green, then you lack a lot of important mana and a lot of good removal. But keep in mind what all CEDH decks have in common is a low mana curve, reliability, and efficiency in your strategy, making it so that your win con doesn't take several turns to assemble. Being able to do something as soon as the very first turn means that an opponent is not just going to run over you. So anyway, I hope this helped you out. I've been playing it for about 4 years now, and to me it's essentially the new legacy, especially with all the prices for dual lands now. What used to be a reasonable barrier to enter Legacy is now a fortress. So instead of getting a playset of dual lands, you only really need one in competitive EDH. So there you have a reason alone as to why so many people are looking into competitive EDH. The decks are not so much open to interpretation. There's a competitive shell that most people pay attention to, and then they apply it to the newest commander that might take advantage of it in a better way. So you all have a wonderful day. Void here signing off. See you all next time.